I'm Nathan, 20, and college has always been my escape. Living with my mom and her husband Rick has been rough since they married 5 years ago, and it's only gotten worse. Rick constantly nitpicks everything I do, and no matter how hard I try, it's never good enough for him. Just last week, I had a late study session for a big project, losing track of time, and when I got home around 9 p.m., Rick started shouting. I tried to explain that it was an important assignment, but he wouldn't listen. He accused me of wasting time and made it sound like I'd been partying. I told my mom where I was, and 9 p.m. isn't even that late for a college student, but none of that mattered to him. The criticism went on and on until I finally retreated to my room. It's like this with everything. A few months back, I got a B+ on a really tough exam. I was pretty proud of it given the difficulty. So I decided to show Rick, hoping he'd see my hard work and maybe offer some encouragement. Instead, he just scoffed, asking if that was the best I could do and telling me I should be aiming for straight A's. That stung. It made me feel like all my effort was worthless. Last summer, I thought maybe working would show Rick I was taking initiative. I got a part-time job at a coffee shop, thinking he'd be pleased I was making my own money. Instead, he complained that my work hours disrupted family dinners, which were rarely pleasant anyway. He kept saying it would interfere with my studies. No matter what I did, he'd find fault in it. And my mom? She's rarely much help. She's more focused on her own life than being a parent. Growing up, she'd forget simple things like my school lunches or signing permission slips. Now in college, she barely asks about my classes or how I'm doing, like I'm some roommate she shares space with instead of her son. Looking back, I wonder how we ended up here. My parents split when I was 15, after years of arguments and tension at home. I'd grown used to my mom having the last word in every fight, always twisting things around to make my dad seem like the bad guy. One fight stands out. My dad had forgotten to pick up groceries she'd asked for, and instead of calmly reminding him, she exploded. She accused him of not caring, bringing up every little thing he'd ever done wrong, and making him sound like a terrible husband and father. I could see the frustration in my dad's face as he tried to defend himself, but he never got a word in. Not that my dad was perfect. He could have a temper and would sometimes say things he didn't mean, but looking back, I feel like my mom knew exactly how to push him to the edge. She'd get him to react and then play the victim. When they announced they were divorcing, my mom painted herself as the devoted wife who'd tried everything to make it work, making it sound like my dad was abandoning us. I found out later she'd been the one to file. It felt like more manipulation, setting herself up to look like the good guy. After the divorce, my mom moved on fast. She met Rick almost immediately, and within 6 months, they were married. I didn't have any time to process the divorce before suddenly having a stepdad in my life who had his own way of doing things and didn't seem interested in how I felt about it. Rick came in with strict rules about curfews and chores, even though I'd always been responsible. It felt like he was looking for ways to show who was in charge. Mostly, I stayed quiet. I didn't want to cause more drama or make things worse. I focused on my studies and tried to be out of the house as much as possible. But yesterday, things finally came to a head. I had a big calculus exam coming up, a tough class, and I needed to do well. I'd been studying all day and still had some material I wanted to review. Around 11 p.m., I moved to the living room because my bedroom is right next to my mom and Rick's room, and I didn't want to disturb them. The living room was always a quiet space where I could study late if needed. Just past midnight, Rick came out and immediately started complaining about the light. I explained calmly that I needed to study, but he insisted I go back to my room. I tried explaining that the living room was the only quiet space in the house, but he wasn't interested in listening. Instead, he exploded, ranting about how ungrateful I was, how I was wasting his electricity, and even saying I'd probably fail the exam anyway because I was too stupid to study properly. His words hit like a punch to the gut. I'd been working so hard, and to have him dismiss all of that and insult me like that, it felt like the final straw. The noise brought my mom out of the bedroom. I hoped, just once, she'd stand up for me. Instead, she told me to do as Rick said and go back to my room, completely ignoring how unfair and hurtful he was being. She didn't seem to care how his words affected me or how important that exam was to me. After that, I couldn't study anymore. I sat up all night thinking about everything. By morning, I'd made a decision. I couldn't keep living in this environment. As soon as my mom and Rick left for work, I started packing. I threw some clothes, my laptop, and a few personal items into a duffel bag, wrote a note saying I needed some time away, and left it on the kitchen table. Then, feeling a mix of fear and relief, I walked out and headed to my grandparents' house across town. I'm writing this from their guest room now. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know I can't go back. The relief I felt as soon as I stepped out that door was overwhelming. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. I don't have a full plan yet, but I know this was the first step I needed to take. I just hope my grandparents understand why I had to leave and can offer me the support I've been missing. It's been a couple of days now since I moved into my grandparents' house. The contrast between their home and my mom and Rick's place feels like night and day. Here, everything is quiet, calm. There's no walking on eggshells, no random explosions of criticism, just a peaceful space where I can actually breathe. I've been responding to my mom's texts with short messages, just letting her know I'm safe. I'm not ready to talk to her yet, and it's easier this way. Rick hasn't reached out at all, which doesn't surprise me. Honestly, he probably doesn't even notice I'm gone. When I first showed up at my grandparents' house, they were surprised but didn't ask too many questions. My grandmother immediately made me a sandwich and started fussing over me like she used to when I was a kid, asking if I needed anything and insisting I eat. My grandfather just gave me a long look, like he knew something was up, but wasn't going to push me. I appreciated that. I've never been good at opening up about personal things, and having them let me settle in without questions was exactly what I needed. The guest room here is more comfortable than my room at my mom's place has ever felt. I can sleep soundly without any constant noise or tension seeping in through the walls. It's amazing how much my stress has lifted in just a few days. Yesterday, my mom came by trying to talk me into coming back. She used phrases like, "We miss you," and "Rick is worried about you." But I could tell she didn't really mean it. If Rick had been worried, he would have reached out himself. I told her I needed space and wanted to stay with my grandparents for now. She wasn't happy, but I think she knew she couldn't convince me otherwise. One thing about being here with my grandparents is that it reminds me of all the good memories I have with them. My grandfather and I used to go fishing every weekend when I was little. He taught me how to bait a hook and cast a line, never losing his patience, even when I'd tangle the line a dozen times. He'd tell me stories from his own childhood, and we'd talk about everything and nothing, just waiting for the fish to bite. I miss those trips, but the bond we built back then is still there. My grandfather was the one who encouraged my love for computers. He didn't know anything about programming, but when he saw my interest, he went out and bought me my first coding book. He'd sit with me for hours as I explained the basics to him, even if he didn't completely understand. His support meant everything. When I started college, he was the one who offered to help with tuition. Rick had refused to contribute, saying he couldn't afford it, though he somehow always found money for his own hobbies. My grandfather stepped in without hesitation, but it wasn't just about the money. He would always check in, ask about my classes, and even try to learn some coding himself to keep up with my studies. It was more than I ever got from my mom or Rick. This morning I overheard him on the phone with my mom. His voice was calm but firm, which is rare for him. I couldn't hear everything, but one phrase stood out. "I won't be sending you any more money." When he hung up, he didn't mention the call, just asked if I wanted to go fishing this weekend. I said yes, grateful and relieved to know he was in my corner. Later that day, my mom showed up again. She was upset, demanding to know why my grandfather had cut her off and insisting I come back home. My grandfather didn't back down. He told her plainly that the money he sent was for my care and education, not for her to spend however she pleased. He said I'd be staying with them, where I could have a supportive environment to focus on school. My mom tried to argue, talking about how she'd raised me and saying I belonged at home, but my grandfather didn't budge. My grandmother, usually the quieter one, spoke up too. She told my mom how disappointed she was, not just in how I'd been treated, but in the choices my mom had made over the years. She didn't raise her voice, but her words cut deep. She said she'd hoped for better from her daughter, and that the way I'd been neglected was unacceptable. Listening from the next room, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt guilty for causing this family rift, but another part felt relief. For the first time, someone was standing up for me, acknowledging the things I'd been dealing with. My mom finally called out, asking me to come talk to her. When I stepped into the room, she immediately started the waterworks, saying how much she loved me and wanted me back home. But I'd heard those words before, and this time I wasn't moved. I told her plainly that I needed space and couldn't go back, not after everything that had happened. For a moment I saw a flash of anger in her eyes before she covered it with more tears, but it only strengthened my resolve. I was done being manipulated. After she left, my grandparents sat with me, offering comfort and support. They apologized for not realizing sooner what I'd been going through and promised to help me however they could. They even suggested I see a therapist to work through some of the issues I'd been bottling up for years. We talked about the possibility of me living here until I finish college, and they assured me I'd always have a place with them. For the first time, I feel like I can actually start focusing on my future without the constant weight of tension and criticism. I'm diving back into my studies, more motivated than I've felt in years, and my grades are already showing improvement. I've joined a study group and started connecting with new friends, and it's amazing how much easier it is to engage with people when you're not constantly feeling anxious and stressed. I don't know what this means for my relationship with my mom and Rick. A part of me hopes that this experience might wake them up and help them realize how their actions have affected me. But at the same time, I'm learning to set boundaries. For the first time, I'm prioritizing my own well-being, and that feels liberating. I'm grateful to my grandparents for giving me this space to heal and for showing me what genuine support and love look like. It's been a few weeks since I first came to stay with my grandparents, and in that time, life has settled into a calm, almost surreal kind of normalcy. I'm still working through everything that's happened, but staying here has helped me find stability I didn't realize I was missing. Being away from my mom and Rick has made me see things even more clearly. I no longer have to constantly be on edge, bracing for the next comment or criticism. The peace here has been a lifeline. Since moving in, I've been able to fully focus on my studies for the first time in years. Without the daily arguments or tension weighing me down, I've thrown myself into my coursework. I'm actually enjoying it again, even the tougher classes that used to stress me out. My grades have improved already, which feels like proof that I'm finally on the right path. My grandparents have been noticing too. They're proud of the progress I've made, always cheering me on in their quiet, steady way. My grandmother always makes sure there's something good to eat, especially if she sees I've had a long day of studying. And my grandfather started picking up some of my textbooks, asking me to explain things just so he can understand what I'm working on. They've taken a genuine interest in my life and my goals, something I didn't realize I was missing so much. Recently, though, my mom's been pushing harder for me to come back. She's been texting and calling regularly, trying to get me to come over or at least have a real talk. I can sense her frustration every time she reaches out, as if she doesn't understand why I'd prefer to stay with my grandparents. Rick has apparently still not reached out, but I'd be lying if I said that surprises me. If anything, he's probably happy to have one less person around to challenge him. Then a few days ago, my mom showed up unannounced at my grandparents' house. This time, she was different, angrier, more forceful. She barely greeted my grandparents before launching into a speech about family loyalty and respect, and how I was betraying her by not coming home. My grandfather quietly asked her to calm down, but she ignored him, turning her attention straight to me. She demanded to know why I was still staying here, why I hadn't responded to her messages, and how I could be so ungrateful after everything she'd done for me. At that moment, I felt something inside me harden. I could see her for what she was, someone who didn't truly care about my feelings, just the inconvenience my absence created for her. I looked her in the eye and told her that I was tired of pretending everything was okay, tired of her always putting her needs and Rick's approval over my well-being. I told her I was finally doing something for myself, and I wasn't going to come home just to make her feel better about her choices. She looked stunned, and for a second I thought I saw a flicker of guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Instead of addressing what I'd said, she turned to my grandparents and began pleading, almost like a child caught in a lie. She accused them of taking her son away, and said that she felt betrayed by her own family. But my grandfather, calm as ever, simply told her that her son was a grown adult and had a right to choose where he wanted to live. He said that while they would always support her, they could no longer ignore the way she'd treated me. My grandmother added quietly that they just wanted me to feel safe and supported, something she could tell I hadn't felt at home. Eventually, my mom left, clearly angry and hurt. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Part of me was relieved that I'd finally stood up for myself, yet another part ached at how fractured our relationship had become. I went to my room afterward, needing a moment alone to process it all. My grandparents checked in on me, asking if I needed anything but respecting my need for space. Their understanding was exactly what I needed at that moment. In the following days, things settled down again. I didn't hear much from my mom, which I think was her way of punishing me for standing my ground. But honestly, I was too focused on my life here to dwell on it. I joined a study group on campus, and for the first time, I actually feel like I have a support network of people who genuinely care about me. We meet a few times a week to go over class material, and I'm slowly getting to know my classmates better. Some of them have even become friends, people I can talk to without feeling judged or criticized. It's strange how different it feels knowing I have people I can trust in my life. One evening, while helping my grandfather with some yard work, he surprised me by bringing up the idea of therapy again. He said he knew I'd been through a lot and that talking to someone who could help me process everything might be beneficial. He reminded me that I didn't have to carry everything alone. At first, I resisted the idea. Therapy felt like admitting weakness, something I'd grown up trying to avoid. But he said something that stuck with me. Strength doesn't come from carrying all the weight yourself. It comes from knowing when to ask for help. After giving it some thought, I decided to give it a try. My grandparents helped me find a therapist nearby, and I've started going once a week. It's still new, and I'm not entirely comfortable opening up yet, but I can already tell it's going to help. The therapist has been helping me untangle my emotions, showing me how to make sense of my feelings and teaching me healthy ways to cope with them. She's encouraged me to stop blaming myself for things I can't control, like my mom's choices or Rick's behavior. For the first time, I feel like I'm learning how to put myself first, and that's something I never thought I'd be able to do. Since starting therapy, I've begun setting firmer boundaries with my mom. I let her know that while I'm open to having a relationship, it will have to be on my terms. I told her I won't tolerate disrespect or manipulation, and that if she wants to talk, it has to be a genuine conversation, not just a guilt trip. She didn't respond well to that, but I expected it. For the first time, though, I don't feel responsible for fixing her feelings or managing her reactions. I'm starting to see that my job isn't to make her happy, but to take care of myself. Through all of this, my grandparents have been my steady support. They've given me space to grow and discover who I am, while always making sure I know they're there when I need them. My grandmother told me the other day that she's proud of me for standing up for myself and for taking steps to create a healthier life. Hearing that felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. Their encouragement has been like a quiet, constant warmth that I didn't realize how much I needed. As I settle into this new life, I'm realizing just how much I want to live for myself, to build a future that reflects my own dreams and goals. I don't know where things will go with my mom and Rick, and part of me still hopes that someday they'll understand. But even if they don't, I know now that I have the strength to move forward on my own terms. It's been a few months since I left my mom and stepdad's house, and life has changed more than I ever thought it could. Every day, I feel a little stronger, a little more like myself. Living with my grandparents has allowed me to rebuild myself in ways I hadn't imagined. The simple routines here, the quiet meals, helping in the garden, even the way they listen without trying to control, have become a safe haven, a place where I can finally breathe. At school, my grades have continued to improve, and I'm thriving in ways I didn't think possible. My study group has become a close-knit circle, and I've made friendships I genuinely value. We're all working toward the same goals, and it's been reassuring to have people by my side who understand the pressure of school, but also encourage one another. We laugh, study, vent, and make plans for the future. And for once, I'm hopeful about mine. Therapy has become a cornerstone of my growth. At first, I was just going through the motions, hesitant to trust anyone with the darker parts of my life. But my therapist has been patient, helping me untangle years of hurt and confusion. She's taught me how to set boundaries, not just with others but with myself, to stop dwelling on things I can't change, to forgive myself for not being able to fix every problem in my family. One thing she said resonates deeply. Healing is not a destination. It's a journey you walk with yourself at your own pace. I'm finally beginning to understand what she means. My relationship with my mom remains strained, though we're in limited contact now. After I set my boundaries, she pulled back, likely trying to punish me with silence. But that no longer bothers me like it used to. She's tried reaching out a few times, usually with guilt-laden texts about how family is everything and how I owe her respect. I've learned to respond briefly, keeping my distance to protect my peace. Her messages no longer carry the weight they once did. I can finally see through the manipulations and focus on what's best for me. Rick hasn't reached out at all, not that I expected him to. His absence has only reinforced my choice to leave. It's clear now that his influence was as toxic as I thought, and I'm grateful I no longer have to endure his relentless criticisms or attempts to control me. My therapist calls it a clean break, and though it stings to know I'll likely never have a real relationship with him, it's a wound I'm willing to bear if it means I get to live my life on my own terms. My grandparents, meanwhile, have continued to be my unwavering support. Recently, my grandfather surprised me by transforming a small room off the garage into a study space just for me. He didn't make a big announcement or anything, just quietly set it up with a desk, a comfy chair, a few lamps, and a shelf for my books. When I saw it, I was overwhelmed. It felt like a physical representation of the love they've shown me, a place dedicated to my growth and my dreams. I've started calling it my sanctuary, and it's become where I go to study, read, or just think in peace. It's a small gesture, but to me, it means everything. The other day, my mom showed up at my grandparents' house unexpectedly. She looked different, more tired maybe, or perhaps it was the realization that things had changed between us. She tried once again to convince me to come back, using the familiar tactics of guilt and tears, telling me how much she needed me home and that Rick was willing to make things work. But I stayed firm. I calmly told her that while I understood her feelings, I needed to continue focusing on myself and building the life I wanted. I reminded her that I was willing to have a relationship, but it would have to be based on respect and understanding. She left not long after, visibly frustrated, but I could tell that for the first time, she was beginning to see that I wasn't going to fold under her pressure. After she left, my grandmother hugged me, and my grandfather simply nodded, giving me that proud, understanding look that says more than words could. I realized in that moment that I had the family I needed right here. My grandparents have shown me what real, unconditional love looks like. They've taught me that family isn't about who you're born to, but who stands by you, who respects your dreams and supports your growth. With their support, I've started planning for my future in a way I never had the freedom to before. I'm looking into internships and hoping to land a summer position in a tech company nearby. I've saved up enough from my part-time job to buy a decent laptop, and I'm excited to apply what I've been learning in school. For the first time, I have goals that aren't clouded by someone else's demands or expectations. My grandfather's health has been stable, though he has his ups and downs. I make it a point to spend time with him as much as possible, often helping him in the garden or listening to his stories about when he was my age. Each moment with him feels like a gift. I can tell he worries about what will happen after I graduate, whether I'll stay close or move away for a job. He hasn't said anything directly, but I see it in the way he lingers a little longer when we talk, the way he sometimes reaches out to pat my shoulder, as if reassuring himself I'm still there. I've told him that no matter where life takes me, I'll always be there for him and Grandma. They're my rock, and I'll never forget what they've done for me. Looking back, I see how far I've come since the night I packed my bag and left. I'm no longer that scared, uncertain kid trying to please everyone but myself. I'm building something real for the first time, something that's mine. I know the road ahead won't always be easy. There will be challenges, and I might stumble, but I feel equipped to handle whatever comes. I know now that I'm not alone. I have people who love me, who believe in me, and who want to see me succeed, not for what it brings them, but for what it brings me. This journey has shown me that sometimes the hardest choice is the one that sets you free. Walking away from a life of constant criticism and manipulation was the first step. Finding the strength to stand my ground and to insist on my own worth has been the next. And while I'm still learning and growing every day, I know that I'm on the right path, so here I am, ready to face the future with hope, with confidence, and with a newfound sense of peace. I'm grateful beyond words for my grandparents and for the support they've given me. I may not know exactly what lies ahead, but I know I'm strong enough to meet it. And that, more than anything, is a feeling I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.